Hi guys, and thanks for joining me on another episode of Design and a Half. In today's episode, I would like to talk a little bit about Agile and UX. And the reason for this is because I think that a lot of people are sort of taking Agile as a methodology for working for granted and just applying it sort of willy-nilly into their organizations without thinking how this impacts UX, especially if they have UX people on board. And I think Agile in itself is a very contentious and very disputed term nowadays, just because of the fact that there's a lot of companies that are touting it or sort of using Agile as a way to justify not doing research, not doing any sort of background checking, any sort of informed decisions with regards to the product they are shipping. And this is sort of started to become increasingly problematic over time because of what type of products are being shipped under the guise of Agile. So the main issue is that we're seeing a lot of physical products and physical things that are being shipped as Agile software products, sort of using the same mindset. And this is basically false because, first of all, physical products have a different lifespan than software products. And secondly, they are way costlier to produce, they are costlier to acquire, and supposedly their life cycle is sort of longer, just because you would think that they are an investment, and to some extent for both the company that is producing them as well as for the people that are just buying those products outright from marketplaces, which means that sort of we're in a situation where products like a phone now are taking 1 year to develop, which is basically ridiculous if you compare it to how it was a couple of years ago, when you would see products come up every 2 or 3 years, just because people knew they were such a big investment, first of all, to develop from a software perspective, and secondly from a physical product perspective as well. They involved changing supply chains, changing sort of product plans, and so on and so forth. There's a lot of stuff involved into developing a physical product that is costly and takes time. So in that sense, sort of waterfall as a methodology for working makes way more sense than using Agile to develop physical products. But coming back to my original point and topic of discussion, which was Agile and UX, how do these things mesh together? Well, the problem is that UX as a methodology for working requires a lot of time and requires a lot of informed decisions. What this basically means for organizations is that it basically puts a whole chunk of time and sort of slaps it at either mid-release cycle, or sort of at the beginning or at the end of the release cycle, depending on what exactly it is that UX wants to achieve during those particular times. And that means that sort of the release cycle is being put in jeopardy by the fact that you're carrying out research, you're doing field studies, you're trying to do I don't know, workshops, and trying to determine whether the product that you are building and the features that you're sort of delivering for people are the right ones to begin with. And to some extent, this is the sort of problem that business oftentimes clashed with design, because nowadays sort of the why we're building the product no longer resides just within the business and just within the realm of vice presidents and CEOs and so forth. It sort of comes at the confluence of design, technology, and business, which means that no longer is it okay for companies to just make decisions that are strictly based on strategy and business planning without involving design and user experience as well, just because of what they would end up building in the first place, as well as the potential pitfalls that they might encounter down the road after building the product and deciding and seeing that it wasn't fit for the market. If you just want a small reference for this, you could just take Juicero, for example. Juicero was a product that was built, and it's quite famous. It's sort of quite famous for this fact, just because they actually built a physical product to be able to warrant and make sense to build the actual business side of stuff. This is very badly explained right now. Let me just try and rephrase this. So they actually made a device that was squeezing out juice from bags just to be able to warrant the fact that we're just selling those juice bags. So you basically had to buy a machine to squeeze out a couple of juice bags that were like $5 or $6 a piece, whereas the machine was like $100 or something like that. So it completely didn't make any friggin' sense to just build a machine to be able to squeeze out juice from bags when you as a person could do that just as well. This is just an example of what it means to build a product just business first without thinking whether or not this product fits the intended use case and the people that are going to actually use the product in itself in the end. And this is sort of becoming common practice now just because of the mindset that Agile instills in a lot of people, mainly the fact that you can fail often, fail fast, and it's just okay to fail fast and fail often because that's the Agile way to do it. And this is sort of damaging both the company in itself when they're creating these products, as well as demotivating people that are working on the products themselves, because you have to understand, people that are working on specific software products, be they developers, product designers, UX designers, product managers, whatever they are, they want to see this thing through. Like, they just want to see this thing go out the market and wow people and see how well it did. And when you're looking at a product and thinking, oh my god, does this thing ever gonna see the light of day? Why isn't it fit for the market? Like, why didn't they build this thing? Why am I working on something else? Why doesn't it, there's questions that people ask themselves just because they are not they didn't ever expect that thing that they built to not be out on the marketplace, to at least be able to get a sense of what the thing feels like and how people are reacting to it, because it's sort of this creator complex where people end up doing stuff because they want to see it do well, and they want to see how well it does after it's being shipped. This is just absolutely common through all of the companies which are doing products nowadays. So it's not uncommon to see people act and have this sort of mentality whenever we're talking about software or physical products in a way. And you have to understand, having some sort of stake and claim into the development of a product is really important for the people that build it, just because without that stake and that claim, there's really no motivation to actually just make them, okay, let's just build this thing. Okay, why are we building this thing? Because I want to have money and I want to have be able to pay the rent and buy food. Okay, leaving that stuff aside, we're also motivated by by factors outside of that, which are sort of higher on the pyramid, the pyramid of needs that we have, Maslow's pyramid. And what was I trying to? Oh yeah, apologies. So if people are sort of engaged in building the product, they are motivated to do great just because of the outcome that they see in the final stages, and when they see the final product being shipped out, and they sort of get the reaction from people, and that's something that you as a designer are sort of nourished upon, and you actually like that because it's why you're doing products in the first place. You're not doing them for yourself. You're always doing them for other people. You're doing them for a specific purpose, and you want to see whether or not what you build is fitting into that purpose or not. And if it does, how do people react about it? What do they feel like? Do they like it? Do they dislike it? What do they feel like it? Feel like about your product. And to some extent, this is where the really ugly part of Agile sort of comes in the sense that Agile sometimes means that you won't necessarily see the thing that you built, that you've worked, 6, 7, 8 months on. You won't see it through up until the end. It might get shelved, it might get discarded just because it's not fitting into the purpose. And this is very demotivating for people. And especially to UX people, it's even more demotivating to be able to see that you're not going to do research because it doesn't necessarily fit into the project scope. It doesn't necessarily fit into the timeline and the time budget, if you will, because to some extent projects are built upon time budgets as well as the financial budgets, or basically those two things are interlinked in a way. Anyways, not having enough time to be able to do the proper research means that a lot of the stuff that you're going to build is going to be gut based, and there's a lot of stuff that's going to be built around your personal decisions, your personal feelings, your biases. And I think this is the worst sort of place to be in that sense, because and this is a huge problem in business as well, because people in business are just as sort of subjected to bias as researchers are and designers. The only difference is that designers are and good designers especially are way more aware of when the bias is slowly starting to creep in, and they sort of pump the brakes and say, okay, let's just go back and see this from another perspective, because I feel like some bias is creeping in, and I'm just going to ask another opinion, or I'm going to have a look at this with another pair of eyes tomorrow or a day after tomorrow, whatever. Just because they know they are sort of biased by being in that specific spot. And that's the second reason, for example, for why we do user testing. It's why we're going out there and asking people to have a second opinion of why we're trying to build whatever the hell we're trying to build. Or even better than that, before actually starting to build anything, we're just going there and see, okay, I want to build a new product, but I have no frigging clue about what people need or want. So how do I approach this? Am I going the regular way of saying, okay, let's talk to the marketing guys, let's talk to the sales guys, let's do a competitive analysis, let's look at what the hell the competition is building, let's see what the trends are. This is all fine. That's perfect. That makes sense. But rather than just doing that, a lot of companies aren't doing the really common sense part of actually going there and asking people, dude, what the hell is your problem? Like, what am I trying to help you with? What can I help you with? Like, what are your day-to-day problems that I might be able to derive a potential solution from? This is very, very important, because in a world where we're basically just competing for digital real estate, if you will, for people's attention for all of the hell, it's really important to be able to solve an actual problem people have, rather than solve a nuisance or an annoyance. Just because annoyances and nuisances don't have the same emotional value attached to them as actual problems do. Like, problems create real emotional triggers. They are really annoying for people, and they either create business detractors, or they create money issues, they create time issues, and so on. Those are the sort of things that you can optimize on and build products upon, rather than just building building a product based on a nuisance or a minor inconvenience people have. That's just bad, and it's not going to end up okay for either the product or for you as a company that is building such a product. And this is equally valid, especially if we're thinking about, just for example, design tools. Like, there's a bunch of design tools out there, and one of the probably the biggest sort of example for why a design failed, or why a design product failed, is InVision Studio. Like, InVision Studio started out as the prime competitor for Sketch. It was amazing when it started off, to some extent. in the sense that InVision Studio had a lot of premises, being able to run on Windows and Linux and well, not Linux, but Mac and Windows at the same time. That was really important, especially since they were selling it as free in a way. It was sort of their way to make you sort of buy into the whole InVision ecosystem. But it tanked spectacularly just because of how usability was done on that product. Secondly, of how performance was on the product, and the fact that a lot of people had invested a lot of time into developing workflows with Sketch, as opposed to, I don't know, adopting InVision Studio just for the sake of making it a novelty and cutting some costs, for example. Because you have to understand, at some point, cost is not necessarily such a big issue, as opposed to, for example, interoperability, scalability, and the fact that you can use it across multiple places, and it's stable and mature enough to sustain a sort of day-to-day workflow. At that particular time point, like InVision Studio was not that type of application. Personally, I don't think it's not like that today either. So I think it's just a matter of time until InVision Studio is going to be shut down, or at least the team is going to be repurposed into something else. I really don't know. To some extent, I feel like they dropped the ball magnificently on that part because of, and this is the funny part. Here is where UX would have helped them, additionally to product strategy and sort of having a better vision of what an ecosystem can look like. Because this is another thing. If you don't think about ecosystems in the long run, you're going to lose a lot of potential ground against other competitors. For example, Apple has this huge grasp over technology just because of how they designed their ecosystem to be interoperable, and the fact that, for example, Macs have handoff to the phones, and the tablets have handoff to phones, and the phones work with iPads, and so on and so forth. It's basically all of these things work together to give you the best possible experience. And this is exactly what it means to have user experience designers on your team that are able to do research and actually see what people want, and sort of design them as a web to be able to, everything makes sense in that if you're talking about an ecosystem. It makes sense, it's connected to each other, and it feels like just one thing that works together really, really well, rather than being, I don't know, a couple of parts that are just glued together and held in place with some rubber bands. That's the difference between having a successful sort of business model where you can actually milk, if you want to, several aspects of that ecosystem and still be money positive, rather than just having to rely on one thing. For example, in case of InVisions, that would be the enterprise business model, as well as the individual subscriptions for the InVision collaborative system. Having said that, by the way, InVision said they were launching some changes to how it works, and their biggest mistake was the fact that most of the usability enhancements and the things that made sense were first released on enterprise without even thinking about the, I don't know, normal users and people that are paying $25 a month for that normal subscription. And I think this is just a regular case for why customer experience and UX failed at the same time, just because, and this is absolutely phenomenal for a company that, like other people have said, is really, really focused on evangelizing design and user experience in a way. It's really incredible to see how someone who talks about user experience so much doesn't seem to be able to do that same thing in their own sort of backyard and be able to organize their own company around the topic of user experience and customer experience in the way. So sort of coming back to the topic at hand, which was Agile and UX, I think UX is not necessarily best fitted for small companies and companies which are not necessarily mature enough to adopt UX as an enhancement for their product, but rather UX brings a lot of value to companies which are large enough to be able to understand the business value of having and building the right product for the right type of problem. Or if you're having that problem to begin with, if people that you target have that problem to begin with. And to some extent, it makes sense why larger companies are willing to pay top dollar for UX designers, which are really, really good. Give them sort of the space they need to be able to do a lot of research ahead of actually starting to build a product and sort of bring it into the development life cycle. And they also spend a lot of resources on UX to be able to measure if what they released makes sense in the context of what people are doing, how they are using it, and what actually the people that are using it feel like when they use the product. That's called actually having user interviews post-release, and sort of making sure that whatever you have released makes sense for your customers. And I don't know, trying to be nimble. That's where actually the agile part would have come in and said, okay, let's take the feedback from the customers, let's make smaller releases which are incremental, and sort of add all of that information and split it into several milestones, and basically sort of make a ledger of what the improvements are going to be and when they're going to be released, and make it sort of public to people that are using this application. That's where I would see Agile being really, really useful, rather than in the beginning when you're trying to sort of build the MVP the classical way, when you have a lot of people into the same room sort of plastering ideas onto a whiteboard, instead of going beforehand and asking people and sort of making sure that the business case is built around what people actually need. That's why I think that Agile and UX sort of don't necessarily mix together well, at least not in the traditional sense, and not in most companies, not in the small studios which are sort of engineering driven. It doesn't work that way, and it doesn't really work well in those types of environments. Agile works well in small teams, in engineering environments where it's sort of driven like that. But at the same time, it works well there if there's no designers in there, just because designers have this sort of innate ability of asking questions, a lot of questions, especially the why oriented questions, which sort of give you a nudge and tell you, okay, maybe I'm not necessarily building the right thing, maybe I should stop, or I'm really unsure whether I'm doing the right thing or not. If you're that sort of person, maybe the design team is maybe having a UX team is good for you. If you're the type of person that is really confident and is really focused on executing rather than sort of measuring what you executed, then maybe UX is not necessarily good for you, and you should stick to your current workflow, whether it's Agile or whatever the hell it is. What I've noticed is that the best sort of workflow in that gives UX an opportunity to be a seat at the table is a mix between Agile and Waterfall. And this is really odd, because a lot of people hate on Waterfall because it takes so long to get something out, which, okay, fine, I get that. But at the same time, we're sort of not looking at the correct problem, and we're not looking from the right angle. Instead of looking from the angle where we're rushing in to build products much faster than we were previously doing, we're sort of looking at from the angle we're not doing stuff fast enough, which is basically wrong. It's like saying I want to do stupid shit faster rather than thinking whether I'm doing the correct thing or not. And this is actually the fundamental question here. Instead of asking one, you should be asking the other. And I think to that extent, Waterfall just is a much better solution, because it requires you to document stuff. It requires you to have roadmaps, planning, and be much more rigorous about a lot of beforehand stuff, when you get to the execution part. So you have a lot of information there to begin with, and whatever kinks you still have lying around can still be ironed out by talking around and having people talk to each other and communicate with each other. And this is the funny part about Agile that I've noticed. As much as Agile relies on people communicating, what I've seen is that in most organizations, people really don't communicate with each other. And this is why Agile fails again. Because when you're having stand-ups which take too long, when you're not getting into that 15-minute time frame, when you're having grooming sessions which are turning into architecture sessions and so on and so forth, like, what's the actual point of actually implementing Agile in the first place? Because you're not really doing it the right way, not doing it the way it was designed to work. So you might as well just, I don't know, pick something else, or at least do some sort of Agile that works for you, or at least don't call yourself an Agile organization, because you're clearly not. And that's why you also have all of these Agile certifications and so on and so forth, because those actually represent a commitment that a company makes to actually implement Agile into their organization, as opposed to companies which sort of play it by ear because they have heard about it and so on and so forth. That's my personal opinion on the subject, guys. Anyways, I thank you for sticking it with me so far. I hope you enjoyed the subject. This one was about, not necessarily about, it was more or less passion for me, and as well personal implication, because I've seen a lot of cases where Agile has driven UX to not actually execute on whatever UX needs to be doing. I'm personally UX designer, so I'm very intimate with the subject matter. It's something that I go through on a daily basis, if you want to. And I've seen a lot of situations that either imply that organizations use Agile and they actually don't. So for me personally, I think this subject is more or less a bit sensitive, in the sense that I've been through it and sort of experienced it a couple of times. At the same time, I'm also aware of the fact that not all organizations are built the same. And I do understand that each of us sort of have to find out the best workflow that works for our organization and our needs, which is also true. But at the same time, we also have to think about the consequences of what we're choosing sort of down the road. And this is why I think that a lot of organizations should really think hard about whether they need UX designers on board, or they just need some graphic designers or some visual designers that help them out with whatever tasks they have, rather than just having a UX designer which is focused on research, focused on business, focused on product, and asks a lot of uncomfortable questions, both for you as an organization as well as the user and potentially the business itself. That's my take on it. Anyways, thank you for sticking out so far again, and I hope to see you next time, and have a wonderful rest of the week, guys. Take care. Bye bye.